government has recognized the need for Indigenous communities and non-Indigenous communities to exist cooperatively and in relation to each other. This video will explore the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. Do you have the same understanding of Australian society as your parents? Your grandparents? Your great-grandparents? There is a strong tradition of cross-generational storytelling in Indigenous communities, such that researchers believe they have the longest continuous oral tradition anywhere in the world, dating back some 7,000 years or more. This storytelling has undoubtedly influenced relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, as stories of hardship and hurt at the hands of the European settlers have been passed on. However, rather than creating a barrier to relationships, this may help with the process of reconciliation based on good understanding of historical events. Have your family passed on any stories about your ancestors? Reconciliation Australia targets all generations of society with its workshops and programs, working in schools and businesses alike. Indigenous communities have a deep sense of respect for elders, and more so for ancestors, which is not always reflected in non-Indigenous society. Building relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people can encourage better understanding and relationships across generations. Mark Galliford, researcher in Aboriginal cultural tourism, suggests that tourism might provide a reciprocating structure which could be built upon in strengthening the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. As tourists, people are open to the idea of learning about the other and want to understand better. Galliford notes that this is a reflective process in which the tourist re-evaluates their own understanding in light of what they experience. Most importantly, tourists have the desire to learn and actively seek out new experiences and perspectives, although, of course, something of the tourist may also be left behind. The idea of reciprocity is that each group can receive something valuable from the other. This could be in terms of knowledge, understanding, compassion, empathy, or even material goods. In 2015, the British Museum opened a major new exhibition of Indigenous Australia, with the aim of presenting its history through a range of objects and artifacts. This serves in educating people around the world about Indigenous culture. However, it also raises questions about the origins of the artifacts, and whether they should be returned to the communities to which they originally belonged. Some of these objects exist from the so-called first contact of Europeans with the Indigenous Australians at the end of the 18th century. However, the exhibition has the blessing of some members of the Indigenous population, who believe that it is another means of telling the story of Indigenous Australians around the world. Where to from here? The process of conversation and reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous parts of society is ongoing. The government continues to work at closing the gap between the two groups in terms of education, healthcare, and welfare, but has thus far not succeeded. However, there are many success stories to be celebrated on the journey. Tourism is perhaps one factor which has encouraged better understanding of Indigenous cultures, and the ease of travel around the world means this industry is continuing to grow. What do you think the biggest success in building the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities is so far?